Hello. That was so fancy. That was a last minute workaround on Cecil's part because I was running late for the stream. So apologies for the late start, and thank you, Cecil, for covering the last 30 seconds of it. Welcome, everybody, to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I am a licensed therapist. I run a practice called Effective Artistry. I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for so very many reasons. But it is just a chance for us to all chat, talk with one another. Those of you who are in chat, which I see somebody saying hello already, which just as a quick side note, I have a little, this has always bothered me. I might have mentioned this at some point before on the stream, but on what I see on the stream, there's a little symbol with an I and then a number next to it. And I genuinely don't know what that means. For a long time, I thought it meant how many people were watching this. And then I started hearing from people who were watching it. And even then I thought it was about who's in the chat, but someone just wrote in the chat and the number says 0. So anyway, here we are. And anything anybody says in the chat, questions, whatever, is a conversation. What you do, as long as I'm aware of it, shapes what I do, impacts what I do. And every time I have something to talk about until and unless somebody puts something in the chat so that there's not pressure for anybody to have to. See, I guess users in chat too, but it said 0 when you were chatting. So I don't know. If anybody knows StreamYard and stuff, let me know. Here's what I'm thinking about talking about today is a concept called operationalization. And as always, will change based on what anybody here is bringing up, but that's where we're going to start. Operationalization. So when we're talking about executive functioning, I know I've defined this plenty of times before, but there's not always people, sometimes there's new people. So just as a quick refresher, executive functioning, the technical definition is those conscious processes which allow a person to control their behavior. They're theoretical. We don't really know what they are. We just have to assume that there's something that happens between a conscious, I'm going to do this thing, and then the body actually executing whatever that is. In effect, executive functioning, in a sense, is translating intentions from our conscious, mind. I feel like this is a very weird way to describe all this, into whatever things it needs to be translated into for the muscles to activate and et cetera, et cetera. So we talk sometimes about there's a specific order that this stuff goes in. That's my tea timer. And it goes like this. First, you have to know what you want. Then you make a plan. Then you execute the plan. Sometimes when I'm feeling very pithy or, want to be appealing to what I consider to be like corporate types, I'll talk about it as desire, design, deliver. You got to know what you're going for. Then you put together a plan. Then you execute it. And a lot of the time, we don't actually know that first step part. A lot of the time, we don't know the second step part either. So we have to work backwards. And that desire part, we're just kind of making guesses about what we're trying to do. A lot of what like psychology is really that is like, okay, let's look at what's happening and then use that information to try and make guesses about what people must be attempting to accomplish. When we look at other people or even ourselves, right? Especially when people are talking about the subconscious, which, if you have heard me mention before, is not my favorite terminology, that we're making guesses about, okay, they must want this, they must want that based on what we're observing. So operationalization is the idea of using language to deliberately try to offload that planning process as much as possible. That was a really vague way to say it. It's just this. It's creating an operation. An operation is a step-by-step process that allows you to execute whatever thing you're trying to execute. So the operation for me for drinking a sip of tea would be, visually locate the tea, extend my arm, put my hand around, blah, blah, blah. I cannot imagine why we would ever want to operationalize that. It's a way of taking, I don't know if people are familiar with the concept of the yips. It's mostly talked about in sports psychology. It's the idea that there are things that people can do just like breathing, and then all of a sudden they can't do it anymore. The kind of textbook example is in baseball, a second baseman that all of a sudden can't throw to first base, even though he's done it thousands and thousands of times. Or this last summer, a term I had never heard before, the twisties, in reference to gymnasts, because that's what happened with Simone Biles, that she got the twisties, which when they describe it, what it means, yips, Y-I-P-S. What it's referring to is that there are things that we do without thinking that once we start to try to think about them, that messes it up. The joke in every sitcom ever about, hey, act natural. And then everyone's, because the things that you do without thinking, you cannot replicate those things and think about them at the same time. Where do I put my hands, kind of thing, right? So it's useful to do that, especially when it's something new. We want to be conscious and think our way through, okay, what are the steps? The newer we are to it, the more practiced we are with something, the less we want to be thinking about it because it just gets in the way. But operationalization is a way to kind of start that process. It's being conscious and intentional about, okay, I'm going to do this, then this, then this, then this, then this. And the idea of an ideal operation, and when I say ideal, I'm talking about it in the sense of like, how they use the term in physics. It's like not real. It's an idea of a thing. It can't actually be this. Ideal is to set up an operation that any person who speaks the language could execute that operation without any questions. It's not actually possible, but we want to get to it as closely as possible. So if I were to say, for example, here's how I could operationalize making my son's lunch, because I make his lunch every morning. Make a sandwich, choose a fruit, choose a snack, stuff like that. But that's not an ideal operation, because somebody would have to say, okay, well, what do you mean by sandwich? What kind of sandwich? How big? How do I make it? What counts as a snack? What are the options? What are the fruits, et cetera, et cetera? So I'd have to get more and more specific. We want to start with the least specific operation we can do, that we can come up with, be as general and vague as possible when we first develop an operation. And then when it doesn't work, we always move in the direction getting closer to an ideal, covering more and more. So people will start with things like, I'm going to do my homework after I get home from school tonight. And then they get home and they don't do their homework. But then the next day they use the same operation. I'm going to do my homework when I get home from school tonight. They just try it harder, basically. Instead of, what you can do is bring that operation closer to an ideal one. So instead of I'm going to do my homework, it's I'm going to take all of my homework out of my bag, put it on my desk, and then I'm going to take one piece of homework from the top of it and work on that, and then put it over there, and then the second piece and work on that and put it over there until all the stack is done, and then I put it back in my backpack. And if that works, great. And if it doesn't, you can try getting even more. Okay, first I got to know, what is homework? What is my homework? How do I define that? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm saying this because when we are trying to execute things, there's really only, I guess, three things that would take something from working or not working to the opposite. Set something from not working to working, or working to not working. Number one, and most important all the time, always, is the context. There's just not only the environment, but the resources available to you, the knowledge that you have, the practice, what other people, et cetera, et cetera. And that one, we can impact some things and not others, et cetera. Number two is to throw out the plan and come up with a completely different one. So instead of I'm going to do my homework right after I get home from school, I switch to I'm going to do my homework at 8 p.m., which is a different plan. I've quit the initial one that didn't work and come up with a new one. And then number three is getting more ideally operationalized, getting more specific. I'm putting this out there because one thing that comes up over and over and over again is that people will come up with an idea of how to do a thing, an operation on how to do a thing. And sometimes it is as vague and general as just, I'm going to do the thing. That's as specific as they are or can be. And when it doesn't work, they neither change to a new operation, nor specify, get more ideal in the existing operation. And they don't pay attention to the context. So there is no change happening, and therefore nothing can work. And at that point, people shift. Then instead of changing things so that things work, we try things, right? Like we say, and by the way, this is the part of the context. If I say, I'm going to try harder, what does that mean is harder to define, but it's definitely the context, right? Like if I try to convince myself and push myself harder, that's part of the context. So it's more important that I do it this time than it was before. Maybe that'll change it. But in order to come up with newer and better solutions, we have to be able to quit the old ones. And anybody who's been paying attention for a while, I often will struggle because I want to talk philosophy and frameworks because that's general and I don't know what things people specific. I love, by the way, I love talking specifics. I love being very focused and granular and practical. I just don't have specific problems in this context to work on, which is part of the reason we have the chat. If people want to put things out there that are specific, we can dial in on specifics. But I try and stay more general unless I have something like that. But then I want to translate that into at least examples like you've seen me doing already today. So I'm focusing on this concept of operationalization today as a kind of a way into other things like we might call intervention design and things like that. It's just a framework for understanding what we do and why we do it and whatever. Because in coaching and executive functioning coaching, which we do a lot of here, oftentimes the most important thing to do first and the most helpful and most impactful is to take away somebody's bad answer to a thing. Take away a bad operation rather than trying to give a new one. Most people, when they come to me or to one of our therapists or coaches, they know at least to some degree what is the thing that's bothering them in terms of what they're observing, what's happening that they don't want to happen, or what's not happening that they do want to happen. They'll usually have theories about why it's happening or why it's not happening, but those are theories. But they'll usually have good, information about this is what it is that I want to be different. And then they'll think that they already know how to make it different. And it's just that they're not capable of doing it. And they'll hope that we, as a coach or as a therapist, can somehow take somebody who is not able to do something over the course of their life consistently and change them in some way that makes them capable of doing that thing in that specific way. And that's possible. It happens sometimes. I just can't get myself to have a calendar. Give me a way to do the calendar, right? But really, the most impactful thing we can do at first is get to a lot of detail of what's been attempted, because the brain is a cognitive miser. It looks at things only as much as it needs to, right? It does not spend resources without a reason. So if I have a problem, and we'll choose a metaphorical one here, if I'm hiking down a path and there's a giant boulder in my way, okay, I'm stuck. I want to keep going down the path. So the very first thing my brain is going to do is say, what can I do to get past this obstacle? And the moment that it arrives at an answer, in this case, let's assume that somebody, and it's ridiculous, it's a metaphor. Let's assume that somebody hands me a jackhammer and says, here you go, just take this jackhammer and, bust up that boulder and that will clear the path and you can move on. Cool. Now I have no reason, my brain has no reason, no incentive to look for any other solution because I have an answer. I just need to bulldoze this, or I need to use the jackhammer on this boulder and then I'll get going. And that's great if, the jackhammer works and I know how to use it and the boulder, I can make it. And it's going to vary from person to person, right? Some people have more experience with jackhammers than other people. And some people, whether or not they have experience with a jackhammer, are going to be able to look at a boulder and make better guesses about, oh, maybe this seems like a point where if I start here, it'll go faster. And different people will come to different conclusions about how small of pieces does it need to be broken into to consider it no longer an obstacle. And then do I need to clear those things off of the path or can I just walk over, etc. I'm really extending this metaphor out. But what can't happen is that I can't find a different way of going about it until I decide that doing it with the jackhammer is not a good solution for me. The brain just won't consider it. So until I quit on that solution, I can't come up with another one. And it might work for me. In fact, usually most advice that people give, most commonly, work for most people. That's why the advice is common. That's not the only reason things get common, but that's one of the two. But if it doesn't, we need to move on. And that's where people get stuck with these theoretically true solutions that theoretically, yes, theoretically one could use the jackhammer to remove the boulder. But what if it's out of gas and it just doesn't work? Or what if I don't have the physical strength to hold up the jackhammer? Well, then I don't resolve the problem, but I still have the solution that as far as I know, it's the only operation that's going to work. And I can't do it. Well, where am I going to then locate the fault is on me, because everybody else is saying do it this way and it works for other people. And I can understand theoretically how it would work, even though I can't do it. Until I say, well, whether it would theoretically work or not, it's not working for me, I can't go on to something else. And so as a coach or a therapist, part of the benefit in taking away some of those bad answers, which obviously it doesn't happen by me just saying, get rid of that bad answer, because that's not how the brain works. I ask questions because I don't know if it's a good answer or not. I just ask questions. And as the person tries to answer those questions, any gaps, anything that is missing becomes apparent to them until the brain says, okay, I do have a reason to look more into this because I don't know. It doesn't matter if I say you don't know or not. And then once that happens, you can then utilize all the information you have. Your brain will utilize all the information that you have. Plus, it guides your attention to new things. You'll notice new things differently than you would have before because there's an open question without a solution. And you're going to come up with something better than I ever could. I don't know why this is important to me to say today. I just wanted to get it out there. We have a specific question in the chat. I'm reading this as we go. Oh, Coach Fritz, this is my dad. Hi, Dad. I want to work out. I love working out, but I'm not doing it consistently. What is an ideal way to do that? I've gone to bed with workout clothes on. All I have to do is roll out of bed. The squat, and he corrected there, the squat cage and 500 pounds is next to my bed. Cool. I like the things that you have already done. So revisiting cost and value, which is always at the root. Coach Fritz needs to understand this rolling is not working. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as a quick side note here, by the way, the concept of resilience or grit, which has value, obviously, or it wouldn't be out there, is about how you interpret that. If you interpret it to mean, as many people do, that I'm going to continue to put resources toward solving something, even if it's not working, right? That effectively what we're talking about in that version of resilience is you need to be more willing to suffer, more willing to put up with spending more time and energy and going through pain and discomfort, even though you're not seeing results, because it will pay off at a certain point. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not. Either way, that's a very fragile resilience. It works until it doesn't work, and then it breaks. And even if it works, it's still about convincing yourself to suffer more. And then when we generalize that, that means that our first approach to any failed attempt is to say, well, I just got to keep trying until I go far enough to say, nope, I can't do this anymore. Instead, if we look at resilience as adaptability, flexibility, where I can keep the aim, I don't have to give up on what I'm trying to accomplish, but I can give up on the way that I was trying to accomplish it. And I think that's important to distinguish. I'm not going to tell somebody, I'm not going to say to Coach Fritz, give up on the idea of working out consistently. No, that's what he wants to accomplish. But I might say, give up on doing this, give up on doing that, give up on doing this. And of course, even then, I wouldn't actually say that. I would just ask questions until it became clear to him what things are missing. But back to the framework. So we're talking about cost and value here. And I love, because most people focus more on the value first, right? Like, how do I make it more important to myself? I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to punish myself. Even if we don't do it consciously, the whole, I'm beating myself up in my head because I'm not doing it. What's wrong with me? I shouldn't do this. I'm getting anxious and getting stressed. That's a way of punishing ourselves until we do it. And as soon as we do it, then it's what we call negative reinforcement. The bad thing gets taken away, which reinforces the behavior. But you've already started looking at ways to bring the cost down, which means you're making it easier to do. Part of that you've done by, and these kinds of modifications, usually it requires more effort up front so that each individual time from there on out takes less. So both of these things, sleeping in your workout clothes and putting the thing right next to your bed, both of those things lowered the cost. So there's different ways we can approach this. We can either look at continuing to lower the cost until it becomes something that you can afford to do. We can look at where your resources are going at instead of to this, to see if there are ways that we can free other things up. Because at the root of it, anything that you intend to do, that you find value in but don't do, it's... Now, let me start from the beginning there. If we think that the value and cost are both filtered through our perception, so it's always about what we think, and those things aren't always accurate. If we think the value of something is less than what it costs, then we don't do it. If we think the value of something is equal to what it costs or more than what it costs, then we do it, with one exception that happens all the time, which is that we can't afford to. And this is not something we have a lot of good language around in American culture, at least. I can't speak for everybody. In English, American English, is if I say, I don't want to go to that party, does that mean that my desire to go to that party is at zero? I lack desire to go to that party. Or does it mean that I desire to not go to the party? And the phrase can mean both of those things. It depends on the context. We have to guess at it, which is why I like talking in terms of cost and value, because I can say that going to the party has value to me, but it's not worth the cost. So in that case, do I want to go? The answer in one way is no, because I don't want to pay a higher cost than it's worth. But an answer in another way is, yes, I do want to go. I find value in going to the party, just not enough. So this is the example, the metaphor I use, or the example I use for the accomplishment equation stuff is, if you tell me that you'll give me $1 million and say, do I want that? Yeah, I want that. $1 million. Cool. That sounds good. I would rather have $1 million than not have $1 million. It's not my main focus in life, but I'll take it. So I want it. I have value on it. And then if you say, all you need to do for me to give you this $1 million is for you to give me $2 million first. Well, no, now I don't want that. I'm not. Doesn't mean I wouldn't like $1 million, just not under this context, not where I have to give you $2 million first. But if you raise it and say, okay, you give me $2 million, I'll give you $3 million. Well, now I might do that. So that's the context in which raising the value can work, that we theoretically can afford to do the thing. It's just not valuable enough. So we're raising the value to the point where it's now worth the cost that we could have afforded to pay all along. But if instead you're saying, okay, you give me $2 million and I'll give you $10 million, and I say, okay, that is worth it. That cost is worth that value. I want to do it. Unfortunately, I don't have $2 million to give you, so I can't. And if your response to that is to increase the value, okay, fine. I'll give you 20 million if you give me 2 million. That doesn't change anything. You can drive the value through the roof. I still can't afford to do it. And actually, the higher you make the value, the worse I feel about the fact that I can't afford it. So driving the value up can be great and useful sometimes. Other times, not only will it not work, it actually makes it harmful. And we have to be able to understand the distinction between, I don't think it's worth paying the cost and I can't afford to pay the cost. Because capability is not a binary. You're not capable or not. That's funny. You're not capable of doing a thing or not capable of doing a thing. I need like punctuation. It is not that you are either capable or not capable of doing a thing static. I can jump, I can leap 5 feet into the air. That sounds way ridiculous, but I don't know. Well, in some contexts I can, and in some I can't. Can I leap 5 feet into the air on a trampoline? Yes. Can I leap 5 feet into the air when I'm standing in knee-deep mud? No. So we want to understand that capability, what you're capable of, is dependent on that moment. Not only what is the environment, what are you thinking, what do you know, but also what resources do you have available to you at that time. Because people will get trapped on, I know I can work out consistently. I've done it in the past. So the fact that I'm not doing it right now, it must be some character flaw of mine. It must be laziness. It must be maybe that I don't really want to. When it's just that you were capable of doing it under one context, you're not capable in this context. So then the framework is we iterate. You come up with ideas and try things. You've already done that. Going to bed with workout clothes on, putting the thing right next to your bed. Those are things that you've tried. They didn't work. So now what do we try? Doesn't mean you have to take away what's already been happening, especially in terms of things that lower the cost. Great. You already did the work to put it by your bed, which makes the cost lower. We don't need to undo that. We can keep going down that path and try to lower the cost even more. Or we can try and raise the value even more. Or if it's something that you just can't afford or is a higher proportion, costs a higher proportion of your resources than it's worth, then we can look at freeing up resources from other things. In this particular case, if we want to go further down the path of lowering the cost, one thing to do is to change what you define working out to be. So I'll ask you a question, and I'll do this because it's my dad. So, you know, if you're uncomfortable with it, feel free to tell me. What do you mean work out? What counts as working out? Oh, and there's a delay, so I can't actually wait for the response. I got to talk about stuff while I wait for the response. What counts as working out? Because a lot of the time, again, if we're looking at it as a binary, success, failure as a binary, then which that's why I keep saying aim instead of goal. Goal is binary. If I set a goal, I either achieve it or I don't. If I set an aim, then whatever I do, I still do, and it's just closer to or further from what I was aiming at. So it's not a failure. It's just a thing I did, and now I can observe what happened, and I can engage in mindful practice, which means I am intentionally aiming at a specific outcome and intentionally attempting a specific operation and observing what that operation results in. How close or far from my aim is it? Then I intentionally try a different operation and see, was that closer or further? And then again, and etc. Kid Squatch is giving some great specific ideas in there. Maybe have breakfast first, then go for a walk if you enjoy that more. Lifting heavy weights 5x5, 5 sets of 5 reps, 5 exercises. Getting started on number 1 is the challenge. So if that's how you're defining working out, then getting started on number 1 isn't the challenge. That's observably what is hard, is getting yourself to start. Because I take that to mean that what you're saying is once I start, it's easy for me to do the rest of the workout. But look at the mental math that your brain is doing. What you're saying to yourself, even when you're saying, hey, once I start, it's easy to go the rest of the way. What you're saying is you're turning it into a binary. Either I do this big workout or I do nothing. And the brain is going to make determinations then along those lines. Can I afford to do a full workout right now? Yes or no? And it will end up feeling like, wow, what's going on? I can't even get started. Except that in that statement right there, getting started on number 1 is the challenge. You're framing it as, what's wrong with me? Why can't I even just do 1? When the decision you're actually making is whether I should do the whole workout or not. You've done a very common thing, which is, and this is great common advice, by the way. Frame it binary. I get it. Just get 5 minutes of working out. Yeah. Or actually not even 5 minutes. It could just be, I'm going to put my hands on the bar. I'm going to put the weight on the bar and then see what happens next. Because you already started doing that. So this is what I was saying. The common advice, I don't know how common, it seems relatively common, to break something into smaller chunks so that anything that you do that gets you closer to the aim is worth doing. Like putting on workout clothes before you're intending to go work out. I've heard of, people will talk about lay your yoga mat out on the floor, because then later on when you decide to do yoga, it's there. Plus it reminds you, and etc. So you can keep going in that direction. Just get more and more granular, that rather than I got to do it in this big chunk, I'm doing it in a smaller chunk. But the smallest those chunks can get is moment to moment. I'm going to put my hands on the bar and then see what happens. And if I do it, great. And if I don't, fine. Okay. Turns out now that my hands are on the bar, I think I can do that next part. So now I'm going to lift it up. And then once I do, maybe I'll put it back down. Maybe I'll do a squat. Okay. Turns out I want to do a squat. The key there is on the times when you don't, when you say, okay, maybe I'll do a squat, maybe I won't. And you pick it up and then you say, okay, nope, I don't want to do the squat. That you put it back down and you walk away without beating yourself up. If you consider it to be a failure, all that is you're still considering it. You're trying to trick yourself, but you can't. You can't trick your own brain. It doesn't work that way. It means that you're still considering working out to be something larger than whatever you just did. Success to be something larger than whatever you just did, that it's still a binary. I either did or I didn't, instead of, oh, I got closer this time. Because what we want is to take that data in so that we can start to build correlations. Either this or that. Yeah, in terms of the mental math. Right, that's what I'm talking about. I think that's what you're saying, Kitchwatch, is that if your brain is framing something as a binary, that I either do it or I don't, that's what eliminates the possibility then of doing the middle, the in-between. I think for me, a general way of looking at this that I think is very helpful is to understand that planning, the purpose of planning is not to control your future behavior. It can't do that, obviously. We all make plans that we then don't do for many, many reasons, sometimes because the plan was wrong or bad. You know, we anticipated certain conditions and it didn't turn out that those conditions were, you know, what we thought they would be. The purpose of planning is not to control your future behavior. Making a good plan or an operation does make it lower cost for you to do something. It might also make it higher value, although that's what I'm arguing against right now, is that we shouldn't let plans make something higher value, because if it does, the only way it does that is because not doing it feels bad. I mean, doing it might feel good too, but only because not doing it feels bad. So it lowers the cost and therefore makes it easier and therefore makes it more likely that we'll do it, but we can't force it. What planning is about is problem solving. I am aware of something that is different than I want it to be. That's a problem. Okay, what can I do to resolve this problem? Because once I become aware of it, I got to do something. Well, if there's nothing I can do right now in this moment, then what am I supposed to do? Just sit here and have a problem this whole time and have no resources freed up because they're all going towards this problem I haven't been able to solve? No, I make a plan. I run simulations effectively in my intellect. I imagine what I might be able to do at some other point or in some other context in order to resolve this problem. And when I settle on something, oh yeah, okay, I can do this. I'll start working out every morning. That's my plan. So the problem is, I don't feel good about my body, or I don't feel good about my schedule, or whatever thing. Okay, my solution is I'll start working out every morning. Great. Then the problem goes away because I've solved it. Now, when the time comes, do I actually do it or not? Well, I might do it, and then the problem doesn't come back, which is great. I might do it and the problem comes back anyway because my theory was wrong, that I thought working out consistently would solve whatever the original problem was, and it doesn't actually. So now I've proven to my brain that it needs another solution, so it starts looking for one. Or I might not do it, in which case the problem comes back and I still haven't even tested the theory yet. So we iterate, right? Here's my pithy way of saying this. Schedules, planners, systems, these things are tools, not taskmasters. They're not our boss. And if we don't do what they say we should do, we have somehow failed in some way that's going to cost us, right? What they really are is our past selves' best guess about what would work. I thought when I made the plan this morning, I thought I would want to go to bed. I was so tired at the time. This is a very common one. I was so tired this afternoon. I made a plan to go to bed early. I was guessing at the time that when 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever rolled around, that I would still feel very tired and therefore want to go to bed early. Well, here it is. It's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And actually, I don't feel tired and I don't want to go to bed early anymore. So we have different ways to respond to that. Either we can say, dang it, I did it again. I made a plan and I didn't do it. What's wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? Or I can say, good guess, past me. You thought that I would want to do this. You thought that it would be a good time for this to happen, that I'd be in the right place and have the right resources to be able to do it. Turns out we're wrong. You were wrong. I have more information than you. You existed 5 hours ago. I exist now. I have 5 hours more information than you. And I'm going to make a new plan. I'm going to make a new guess about what will work. And this new guess is theoretically more likely to work because I have more information now. But that doesn't mean it's perfect. All I'm really trying to do is solve the problem again. Okay, crap, it didn't work this time. Okay, but here's what I can do. This will definitely work. I tell my clients all the time, I cannot promise you that there is something out there that will work better than what you've tried. I can promise you that there is something different to try. Pay me, I'm smarter than you, I know more. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to approach my past self that way from now on. Like, you should be listening to me, past self. You know less than me. So let's do some specifics. Yeah, changing your definition of what working out is, either in terms of granularity, like we were talking about, that even just doing one counts as working out. So let me do one and then see if I want to work out again. Another way of doing that is changing the content, not the extent to which you work out, but the specific things that you do. And Kitchquatch actually mentioned earlier the idea of go for a walk if you enjoy that more. And yeah, tap into what already exists. If you know that you like certain things and you can connect those things to the new thing that you're trying to do, that's going to be a lot easier. Because we can come up with theories, but we can never really know why I enjoy a thing. We don't even really know what that actually means. It's just kind of an experience we're labeling. So if it exists, treat it like found money, like, ooh, nice. I've discovered something that for whatever reason I enjoy. How can I use this? Does this connect to any of the other things that I'm trying to do that I don't enjoy? So yeah, reevaluate. Can I do a different kind of a workout that's more in line with what I enjoy? Can I do a different kind of a workout that has more value to me potentially? It sounds like that's probably not going to be the case here because you have a whole setup and everything. So I would imagine that you've chosen these workouts specifically because it's, aiming at what you want it to be specifically, but maybe not. Maybe this is the best you feel like you can do to get at what you want, but really you'd rather be doing these other things and investigate whether that way of working out might be better. Reminders, including from other people, can both lower the cost and up the value. So you can set alarms and you can ask people to check in with you or remind you to do it. I'm going to skip some steps here because I know you, Dad, to some extent anyway. And I know that you, like me and like many of us, are sensitive to social data, meaning that when I talk about sensitivity to a particular kind of data, like auditory sensitivity, what we mean is that the brain, for whatever reason, seems to prioritize bringing that kind of data into awareness more than seems necessary, more than it seems to do with other things, right? So a very common thing, I use it myself all the time, is I will break promises to myself all the time, but I'm not going to break any promises to anybody else. But again, this is about upping the value, not lowering the cost. If you promise somebody that you're going to meet them at the gym to work out, or that, hey, you come over tomorrow at whatever time and we'll work out together, then you're going to be a lot more likely to do it. But that's driving up the value, which sometimes is great, sometimes not. Yeah, Coach Fritz said he loves working out. He does. Although, quick little philosophical sidebar here. I love these terms. I don't know. There's other words to use for this concept than what I'm about to say, but I like these ones. Hedonic versus eudaimonic. It's the old Greek philosophy terms about joy. Really, it's about restoring energy, but that's probably a different conversation. That hedonic versus eudaimonic joy. Hedonic means I am enjoying the thing because the thing in and of itself is enjoyable. The experience itself is an enjoyable experience. Eudaimonic joy means, eudaimonic is EUDAIMONIC. Eudaimonic means the thing in and of itself is not enjoyable, but I have connected it intellectually to something else that I want, and therefore it is enjoyable for me to do it because I feel as though I'm getting closer to something else. In other words, it's purpose, meaning, right? Not just a phenomenological experience, but that it's connected to something, some purpose for you. Try working out with a partner virtually. Yeah, I was actually going to come around to suggesting that. We call that body doubling, especially for people who are sensitive to social data. Having somebody else that you are aware of who is doing a similar thing to what you are trying to do will make it so that you're more likely to do that thing. It becomes easier to do that thing because some of us, here's my self-deprecating way of saying this. I trust other people more than I trust myself. That if I'm okay, this seems like a good idea to me, I'm always, okay, maybe, I don't know. I'm wrong sometimes. If 5 other people that I trust say, this is a good idea, I'm like, okay, great, this is a good idea. So if other people are doing whatever the thing is that you're trying to do, and you're sensitive to social data, your brain is going to be reading, okay, that's what we're supposed to be doing right now, which makes it easier and more valuable to do that thing. The closer what they're doing is to what you're attempting to do, theoretically, the better body doubling works. And the more data you have about the person, the better theoretically it would work, meaning that it's better to do it with someone in person than online because you're picking up more data about them. And the more important that person is to you, theoretically, the more likely the body doubling is to work. None of this is binary, but those are things that you can do. Yeah, hedonic versus eudaimonic, that little sidebar was because some people enjoy the experience of working out. I like the feeling of taxing my muscles. It is hedonic, in and of itself enjoyable. Some people do not, but they enjoy it in a eudaimonic way. I don't like working out, but I like how my body looks and feels, or whatever things I get out of it, right? We could say more about that, but that was a sidebar I said, so we'll get back to the specifics. Yeah, so getting somebody else involved. You can also do what I like to call skill practice, which is to take something like working out or whatever the thing is that you're trying to do and break it down into component pieces and then address each of those pieces separately. So the metaphor I tend to use here is another sports one. Is this two sports metaphors in one stream? If you imagine a professional, let's say, football player, because I know that one more than others. Imagine a professional football player. What do they do in order to be the best football player that they can be? And they definitely do a lot more than just play meaningful games on Sundays. I'm talking about American football here. I got to remind myself that not everybody here is American, which is, professionals mostly play on Sundays. I don't just practice doing that by doing that. In between the games, I do other things to prepare so that I'm better. And what those other things are, we break down a lot. A professional football player, one thing that they do is, scrimmages, right? Like run little plays against other people who are trying their best to stop you. So it mimics it in that way, which is like a way of breaking it down. But other things they do is film work. They go and watch film of themselves so that they can observe and critique and come up with new ideas. And they watch films of their upcoming opponents, or they watch film of other people who they think do good jobs that they can steal from. Little plays. Table work, where they just draw up plays and talk through plays and say theoretically which ones they like or don't like. Working out just doesn't specifically help with any of the specific movements of whatever I'm doing, but it gets my body into a shape where, my muscles work in better ways to enable me to do those things differently. I don't even know. Team meetings and motivational experiences and blah, 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 tons and tons of stuff. So anything can be broken down. And here is it, have breakfast. They eat a specific diet. Anything can be broken down. And here's an easy way to start this. People tend not to look at the physical elements of tasks that they consider to be primarily intellectual. And people tend not to look at the intellectual elements of tasks that they consider to be primarily physical. Meaning, when somebody says, I'm stuck, I'm trying to write and I can't, I have writer's block, almost never does that person say anything about the physical act of typing or writing, by moving a pen across the paper or however they write. They're talking about the creative and intellectual side of things because we consider it to be that kind of a task. But it does involve physical elements. Anything you do involves physical elements. So if you haven't considered that, that's a way to break down the skill practice. One of my recommendations frequently to people who are struggling to do writing assignments, for example, is to start practicing their typing, because that is a skill that makes it so that the overall thing is cheaper because I do it faster. When people say things, which I hear from clients all the time, like, I just can't get my thoughts out. My hands can't keep up with my thoughts. They're always talking about my thoughts are racing too fast. That's the problem. They're never talking about maybe if I get my hands to be able to move faster, that gap will close more. In this case, working out is something that most people are going to think of as a physical thing. So look at the cognitive aspects of it, investigate. And I, again, cheating here because I know Coach Fritz, that you have already done a lot of this. A lot of people have already done a lot. It's more common for sure that people look at the intellectual side of physical tasks than vice versa. But it's something to play with. So sit down and look at on paper, what is it that your workout is? In particular here, we can talk about energy management. Start tracking your energy level. We've done this exercise before. People track time because it's obvious. But if I don't go to support meetings like AA, I'm not entirely sure what you mean there. But if you have access to meetings of people who are struggling to work out, that would probably be helpful for you. I got totally distracted by that comment. What was I just saying? We generally, there's another one here. I'll get to that comment in just a second. We generally pay attention to time. There's something we call availability bias. It's a cognitive bias that the easier it is to access information, the more we utilize, and then therefore the more we weigh that information, consider it to be important. The fact that it is easy to access equates to us thinking, therefore it's more important. Time is easy to access. We have universal measurements, metrics. We can all look at it together, etc. Energy, not as much. So people, when they're making plans, will say, I set aside the time, and then the time comes and I have the time and I don't do it. I don't get it. What's wrong with me? Well, that thing also requires energy as well as other resources. And you might have planned it for a time where you had the time, but maybe when that time arrives, you don't have the energy. So a way to work on that is to just scale energy for yourself. So if you're talking about, I feel tired or drained or whatever, put that at one end of a spectrum and then label the other end of the spectrum. As you become less tired, you become more what? More rested, more energetic, whatever. And then choose a range of numbers or whatever, a scale. I like to default to 1 to 100. And then you just start purely with observation, no correlation, no prediction. Just start by checking in at random times or at the same time every day and saying, where's my energy level at? Oh, it's a 90. Oh, where's my energy level at right now? It's a 20. And over time, you'll automatically start coming up with correlations. And then you can start trying to practice it, plan it. I think working out costs 20 points of energy. So in addition to planning the time, I have to plan when I'm going to have that energy available. And if the time arrives, I don't have the energy, I'm not going to do it. If I have the energy, but it turns out I don't have the time, I'm not going to do it. There's also attention and awareness, and we can get more on that. But we have another comment here. Not to change the subject, but my daughter's been through, this is a bigger one. Daughter been through for drug and alcohol abuse. It's supposed to be an outpatient program, but she hasn't been going and has had several relapses, landing her in the hospital. I'm at a loss as to how to best help her. I don't want to be doing things that enable rather than help. How do I be supportive without enabling? This is a great question. And of course, I don't have a lot of the specifics. And in this case, I'm going to ask you not to put too much of the specifics because this is a public forum and I don't want you putting any information out that, your daughter might not want out there. Trying to support other people. Let's start here. Enabling. There are so many therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and just philosophers, people coming up with new concepts all the time. Every day, new concepts are being put out there. And some of those become popular and some don't. And we have a tendency to take the ones that became popular and just assume that that means that they are therefore more valid, or even just assuming that they are valid. And it's not a coincidence that many of the things that become popular justify not helping people. In other words, things like enabling, things like helicopter parents, things like codependence, things like, I don't even know, there's so many different like psychological concepts that at the root of it is basically saying, actually, sometimes it's better for other people if you don't help them, because we have a natural response as humans to want to help each other. And the closer you are to me and the more distress that I think you're in, the more I want to help you. And if I get stuck, like this person is here, there are different ways to go about that. One is to try new things and blah, blah, blah. And we'll talk about that quickly because we have 8 minutes or so left. But one is for people to go down a path of saying, well, maybe I should not try to do anything. I still want to help. I can't change that. But if I then redefine any actual actions I take as enabling, And you're not doing that, just to be clear. You're not doing that, commenter, and I don't think that you are. You're clearly not. But you are being held up by this concept that is popular because many people do that. Enabling in its original sense, and I'm not even saying that the original sense is 100% valid, but the core concept of what enabling means is the person would not be able to do it without me and is only able to do it because of me. People have broadened that out to mean things like, oh, if I'm nice to someone and they're doing bad things, I'm enabling them. That's not enabling. Being nice to somebody who's doing things you disagree with is not enabling. You can make the argument that not being nice to them would be punishment, and then therefore that would modify their behavior, but punishment is not a way to go about things. So number one, you know yourself and you know your daughter way better than I ever could, but obviously way better than I actually do. So the first thing is this: whatever you feel like you want to do, before you get all the thoughts involved, before you worry about what counts as enabling and what doesn't count as enabling, whatever your impulse is to do that, unless you have reason not to. And that's not a rare exception. Every moment of every day, all of us have many things that we have an impulse to do, a desire to do in a moment that we shouldn't do for one reason or another. This isn't about how rare it should be. This is about where the burden of proof is. Most people approach things, especially big, important things like this, because it's impactful to you. You know, it's high stakes for you. Most people approach things by saying, what's the right way to do it? How do I figure that out and do it that way? And if it's different than what I want, in order to be able to do what I want, I have to justify. I have to come up with reasoning to say why it's okay for me to do what I want, as opposed to what I'm supposed to do. Supposed to do meaning what other people would tell me to do. We want the burden of proof to be the other way. The assumption here is that you know best. So unless you come up with a reason, and other people can give you reasons, but unless you have a reason, you do that. Relapsing, actually, we were talking about resilience. That's a big thing here. Resilience, how you approach a relapse. Some people approach it as a binary. I'm sober or I'm not sober. And so every time I relapse, I have failed. It's what we call a negative aim. My aim is to not use drugs, not use alcohol, abuse alcohol. And so every time I do that, I've failed at my goal of not doing it. And the problem there is that A, that's impossible. The best you can do is to just avoid doing it until you die. But B, every moment that you're doing that requires effort. If your goal is to not do a thing, you have to put effort into not doing that thing. And sooner or later, a time comes where the context is such and your resources are such that you slip. If you're approaching it as a binary failure, that actually gets worse the longer you go. If you go 2 weeks without using drugs and then you use, crap, I failed. I was doing all right and then I failed. If you go 20 years without using drugs and then I use drugs, what's wrong with me? I was doing so good. I'm still broken. It gets worse. It feels worse. We want to change the metric. My goal is not to avoid relapsing. My goal is to be sober. So if I'm sober for 2 weeks, cool. And then I wasn't, but now I get back to my goal, my aim of being sober for as long as possible. And if this time I go 20 years, awesome. I did 20 years. The goal is not ever, whether it's drug and alcohol abuse, whether it's feeling depressed, whether it's, anxious episodes, whatever thing, the goal is not to eliminate it and never experience it again. The goal is to make it so that it happens less frequently, so that when it does happen, it has less of a negative impact, or even a positive one if you can get there, although this is not one where you probably want to mess around with that. To make it so that when it does happen, it lasts less, it has a shorter duration, to make it so that it's less intense when it does happen, etc. So what do you need to do? How do you be supportive without enabling? You talk. That's it. You talk to her. And then the same rule I gave you before about do what you want unless you have a reason not to, do what she wants unless you have a reason not to. And again, not a rare exception. If she says, give me $100 so I can buy more drugs, well, there's reason that you don't want to do that. So don't do that. But if she says, I need to not go to rehab, I just need to be on my own for a month. Okay, well, what's the reason? Helping her change her metric is one way. Yeah, get her to aim at, well, get her to. You can't get anybody to do anything. But if you reframe to looking at what she's accomplishing as opposed to what she's failing, going longer between a problematic episode is a success as opposed to an even worse failure. I'll sometimes say it this way. I have this weird feeling in my stomach and it's uncomfortable and sometimes even painful. And when I talk about it to other people, they tell me it's called hunger and that to resolve it, I should eat food. So I do, because that's what everybody says. I eat food and it does. It works. It gets better for a bit and then it stops working. And then I feel it again. It comes back. And when I tell people, they say, yeah, just eat food. It's hunger. So I don't know what's wrong with me that eating food only works for a little bit. And then I start feeling the hunger again. I don't know why that's the case when it seems like everybody else doesn't experience it that way. I know that's ridiculous, but that is how our brains view things a lot. We assume the minimum, right? That if you say I'm hungry and I should eat food, well, that means you do that and then it's taken care of. Not that you just keep having to do it over and over. You got to talk with her, communicate with her. And of course, I don't know the details, and maybe that in and of itself is problematic for either you or her based on the specifics of your relationship. But I can't know as much as you know, and you can't know as much as she knows about her problem. Now, the other way you can approach this that I think is even better is to approach it as your problem, not that she's using drugs is your problem, but that you look at what your problem actually is. Your problem is, in this case, your worries, your fears, your anxieties about what might happen if she continues to do the things that she's doing. And you can deal with that because then you can be more authentic and draw on information instead of having to filter it through what you think is similar between you and her and blah, blah, blah. But if you're trying to help somebody with their problem, you just got to do what they say and you got to communicate with them as much as possible. And when what they say is something that you think isn't going to work, you share that. No, I'm not going to do that because X, Y, and Z. Not because it's wrong or because that's ridiculous, but I have to actually think it through. One of my rules is anybody is allowed to ask anybody else to do anything they want. And we can even ask ourselves to do anything we want without knowing why we're asking. That's okay. We don't have the resources to understand and think through every why of everything. But if it doesn't work, then the next step is we got to go figure out why we're asking for it. We don't get to ask a second time unless we figure out why first. So I can say, hey, do this thing. And if they do it, great. Neither of us needs to know why it just worked. Who cares? It's not a problem. But if I say do this thing and then they don't do it, then I got to say, okay, why am I asking them? What is it that's important to me here? Because in this case, it's not even the drugs and the alcohol that's your issue. Your issue is your concerns for her health and safety. You want her to be safe and healthy and happy. And you're connecting for good reason drug and alcohol abuse to the idea that she won't be those things, that she would be more safe and healthy and happy if she wasn't doing those things. But that's your real goal. And honestly, there are times and there are people, one of our rules is presume competence, which means everybody does everything they do for a reason. If a thing is nonsensical to me, if it doesn't make sense to me, that doesn't mean it is nonsensical. It means I'm making some assumptions that are incorrect. Either I'm assuming they're aware of something that they're not, or I'm assuming that I'm aware of all the things that they're aware of when actually they're aware of different things than I am, and etc. We can say definitively things like, using certain drugs is harmful, right? We can't say definitively what would happen if that person didn't use those drugs, what would happen instead. And this is not me saying, hey, everybody do drugs all the time. It's just being aware that there are things going on that we don't always know about. And again, people are wrong all the time. I think this thing will help me. Turns out I'm wrong. So it's not to say that everybody makes good choices that work out exactly as they think all the time. That definitely isn't how it happens. But you're going to have the greatest impact by just being present and listening. Because if nothing else, think of it this way. If I tell you, okay, I've got to bake a cake. And I say, this is how you bake a cake. You do X, Y, and Z. I don't actually know how to bake a cake. And you say to me, no, that's not how you do it. You do it this way. You do ABC. Well, assume that I am convinced by you. You make a good point and okay, I'll do it ABC. If that works, great. If it doesn't work, well, A, now I trust you less because you convinced me to do it your way and it didn't work. So why would I listen to you again in the future? It's not a conscious thing. It just, that's what happens. It's not that I like you less. It's just clear, even though you're willing and your heart's in the right place, that you just don't have the information on how it's going to work for me. You're just telling me how it works for you. So I'll trust you less. And B, my next thing I'm going to do is go try it XYZ anyway, which is what I was going to try in the first place. So unless you have good reason to tell me in a way that I can understand that XYZ is going to harm me, I'm still going to come back around to it unless you get me a better solution before I get there. So again, we want to start with, oh, okay, XYZ, that's not how I know how to make a cake, but I don't know, maybe it works. Let me help you make it that way and we'll see what happens. And then when it doesn't, well, now my theoretical solution is taken away from me and my brain is now actually open to new things, as opposed to just doing it because you're asking me to do it, even if you're not forcing or pressuring me or whatever. I can actually consider it as a solution because the one that I thought was the solution turns out it isn't. Long story short, talk all the time, constantly, be open, be honest, listen, presume competence, assume that they're doing what they're doing for a reason, even if you don't know what it is. And unless you have reasons, and reason meaning something I can explain, express, even if they don't agree, that's fine. But if I can't put it into words, it's not a reason. It's just a theory or a feeling or whatever. I got to get wrapping up here. I would love to talk more about that. But yeah, that's how we support people. We are safe for them, meaning, hey, no matter what happens, it's not going to hurt me. I'm not going to hurt you. You can relapse. I'm okay. I'm still here. I'm handling my stuff. Otherwise, if you love me and when you relapse, I'm caused pain, well, then you feel worse when you do, and you're incentivized to hide it from me. Or if you hate me, then why would you share it with me? The only way is that we got to be close, and I got to demonstrate to you that when you tell me these things, I can hold it. Do I like it? No. Does it ruin my life? No. I'm going to be here and keep working. It's not ruining my day. It's not, well, ruining my day. You know, maybe it does ruin your day when your daughter relapses. I'm not saying that you shouldn't care about these things. It's just about how we respond. I want to be safe for the other person, that they can talk through anything with me, that nothing that they say will change how I feel about them. Nothing that they do will make them less valuable to me. I will change what I do in response to what they do, but it doesn't make them less valuable to me. You're not going to lose access to me because of whatever you're doing. That's how you can be open and honest. Make them, make it so that they can. Plus, you got to be authentic. And there's a bunch more, of course, but we're going to wrap up. And that's some things to think about and try. It's a particularly tricky one, and parents and children just generally, regardless of the issue, there's all kinds of things going on in there. But really, one of the hardest is to switch from being the person who has more information and knowledge about what they're doing and what might happen to being the one that has less. And if your kid's an adult, you have less information than they do about what they're doing specifically. You have more information globally because you've had more time to get it and about many things, but not about their life. So I'm not more of an expert on their life than you are. The only person who's more of an expert on their life than you are is them. That's the expert you want to go get stuff from. All right, I really am going to wrap up now. I got to go. Cecil is giving me the signal. Good to be with you all. Thank you for the questions today and comments. I appreciate you guys being here and conversing with me. I'll be back next week, same time, every week. Talk to you all later. Bye.